Whenever I'm talking about my overemployment days, the first question I always get asked, did you get caught? Did anyone know? And the answer, honestly, no. I went 4 years completely undetected working 3 jobs. And while I'm not a Christian, I thought it would be fun to make a 10 commandments like list, but for how not to get caught while overemployed. Let's get into it. Commandment number 1, thou shalt not loosen thine lips, for what is spoken may take flight, and what flies may never return. Secrets once winged know not their master. Basically, more simply, this is just the first rule of Fight Club. Don't talk about being overemployed. It is insanely tempting, and I vividly remember the first weekend that I went out with friends after starting my second job. It was still during the COVID times, towards the end of the lockdowns, where everyone was kinda through with it, but you still had to comply to the regulations. And I can tell you that the urge to flex was feral. I was sitting there rocking, just waiting to explode. I have a second job. Everyone look at me and how genius I am. But I sat with that thought for a little moment. Why did I want to tell people? And the obvious answer was ego. And if that's the case, the right answer always is not to say it. People will get jealous, and people might not have your best interests in your favor and let the secret out. Now, if you follow this closely, that means you say nothing to anyone, but obviously this isn't gonna happen. We're gonna have to tell someone, and I know that I told 2 people, my dad and my best friend from first grade. And these are people who I wasn't trying to brag to them or make them think that I'm super smart. Rather, it was more tactical. You know, you just run into issues that it would be best to run it by someone. So basically they were my sounding boards. My rule of thumb was to make sure that the people I'm telling didn't have any financial gain from what I was telling them. Blanket statement, I would never tell a coworker or a friend who I didn't know super well. This is for your core group only, and even then, be cautious as to who you're telling. And this is particularly true when it comes to social media. This is way easier if you are completely ghost on everything. Just don't post for a number of years. Easier said than done. And I know that sounds a little hypocritical coming from me speaking about it on a social media platform. But I only have 1 job left, which I will leave soon, and I noticed that not many people are talking about overemployment from this perspective of actually doing it, and if they are talking about it, it's never with a face. And as I think this is one of the greatest money-making loopholes that you can have that requires no extra skills, I felt like it was my duty to talk about it in case it inspires someone to do the same. And for that reason, give this video a like. And the second commandment, let's see. Thou shalt set eyes upon thy schedules, stand when light first breaks across the land. If meetings clash as surely as armies, do not tempt fate. With cunning thou must act, pretend thy screen hath turned to black. Or, said a little differently, review your schedule every single morning without a doubt. Because the most common way that people get caught is through conflicting meetings. And in this line of work, conflicting meetings are an inevitability. For me, it happened almost on a daily basis. But I did everything in my power before going to those meetings to try to move them or try not to show up to them by sending an email or using a list of excuses. And this comes with a little bit of time and insider knowledge to know which meetings you're critically required for and which meetings you can just sit there listening on. And when you're on conflicting calls, make sure to heed the 3rd commandment, which is hold fast to the sacred mute, let none hear thy whispered transitions, lest they render thee destitute. You know, that sounded better when I wrote it. So basically, as I was saying before, on conflicting calls, this is the highest risk activity that you're doing, specifically when it comes to the mute button. I have read so many stories of people accidentally unmuting the wrong call and letting everyone hear that they're on a second call. And this is easily the most stressful part of overemployment, sitting there listening to 3 different calls at the same time. I used to sit there with my eyes closed, just parsing everything that was said, listening for my name. And a game changer when it comes to this is using an AI note taker. Because when you're sitting there in 2 or 3 meetings at the same time, it is going in one ear and out the other. You are not going to remember anything. But having a second set of eyes who is summarizing the meeting, which then after you can read, is a complete game changer. So the next day, or when someone asks you about the meeting, you can actually have a conversation about it instead of just saying that you have no idea. And when you're on multiple calls at the same time and someone calls on you and you have no idea what's going on, which will be often, I found the two best excuses to use were one, telling the truth, kind of, saying, sorry, I was multitasking, what was the question again? Or two, and I have no idea why this works, is, sorry, I was on mute, what was the question again? Which makes no sense if you think about it, but it works. It kind of goes back to a point that Robert Cialdini talks about in his book Influence, where if we just use the word because, people will default to trusting whatever you say after it. And speaking of excuses, the fourth commandment, thou shalt keep thy story straight, record thy excuses in a sacred ledger, for once trust is shattered, it is forever scattered. This is kind of insane and maybe taking it a little too far, but I had a spreadsheet on my computer that was tracking the excuses that I used. And the reason being that generally people will believe you. There is the default truth theory, which was coined by Timothy Levin. And we're naturally inclined to believe people because it's an evolutionary shortcut. It would be way too tiring, and we would likely ostracize ourselves from our group if we started calling every single person a liar. So instead, we just blanket believe them until we have enough evidence not to believe them. And then once we have that evidence collected not to believe them, basically anything coming out of their mouth will be read as a falsehood. So we need to make sure that we're not flipping people into not believing us. And one of the ways that that will happen is if you use the same excuse twice, or one that doesn't make sense with your backstory if for each job you are changing things about yourself. And I have heard stories of people coming up with brand new identities for each one of their jobs, and maybe that's because they found it fun, but I don't think it's entirely necessary and will be a point of confusion almost definitely. So that being said, your excuses need to be square. So in my first column, I had all the excuses I could think of, ranging from minor to major. And then I had 3 more columns, one for each one of my jobs, and then I would put a date in the column if I used that excuse, just to make sure that I wasn't reusing them. I also found that in 6 months to a year, I could reuse the old excuses. Now, is this entirely necessary? Probably not. But generally speaking, you will drop the ball frequently. It's gonna happen. So if you can have airtight excuses ready to fling at all times, it's better. And most of the time, honestly, you can just say that you didn't have the bandwidth to get to whatever the item was. But if you do that too many times, people start to get a little suspicious. And along that line, commandment number 5, which is, thou shalt answer thy employer's ping with rapid grace. Email may tarry, but Slack must not lose its pace. For promptness appeaseth the eyes of the master. That was a tongue twister. But I'm basically saying that there are certain types of communication where people set the bar for how busy you are. And generally speaking, your employer wants to assume that you're always working during those 9 to 5 hours, or whatever your hours are, minus lunchtime. And the easiest way for them to start to arise suspicion and start to suspect you of doing other things at work is if you're just idle for too long. And outside of mouse jigglers or any other technical equipment, the easiest way to get people to think that you are on the ball is to answer their Slack, Teams, or even Skype, which Bank of America still used when I left. You answering those messages immediately or as fast as possible. Now, this doesn't mean you have to do the task that they're asking as soon as possible, but just giving them confirmation that you saw the message is critical. But anyway, having a cell phone is absolutely critical, and one that's separate from your normal phone if possible. And then turning on notifications for Slack, Teams, or whatever, and having a specific ringtone for that sound, thus you can jump on it and answer quickly. Now, most people may also turn on their notifications for email, and this, I think, is a little bit foolish. See, email doesn't require that quick response time. I've tried it, I've tested it, and you usually have about a half a day to a day to answer people's emails without them even batting an eye. And the key thing being that you can't just confirm that you saw an email. When people get an email back, they are expecting that whatever they asked you to do or the questions they ask you to answer are within the returned email. So thus, there is a longer wait time that is expected for email. And generally, I found that answering emails twice a day, once in the morning, so then I can add all the things I need to do onto the to-do list, and then once at night was absolutely enough instead of spacing it out, checking every 15 minutes per day, because your time is already going to be extremely fragmented, and the more head down focus time we can get, the better. And because of this fractured type of working, the pacing of your outputs is extremely critical, which takes us to the 6th commandment. Let thy toil be steady as the tide, not swift, but sure. For in the rhythm of routine lies the root of trust, and in trust, the freedom to toil again. Basically what I'm saying is, you need to be a middle of the pack. Be invisible. Do not be an overperformer or an underperformer. And finding that balance takes some time. Usually it means underperforming for a little bit until you get called out, and then raising the bar slightly until you find what's acceptable. And this is absolutely crucial because so many people get caught because their work comes in waves. Sometimes they're being a top performer, and other times they're producing nothing. You just want to consistently produce the bare minimum so people can't complain. Actually, maybe they will complain, but you can't get fired for it because you're still doing what you were hired for. So basically, keep your workload consistent. Make sure every day to carve out time for heads down work. 2 to 3 hours a day can put you miles ahead, but make sure not to overdo it because of the 7th commandment. Tend to thy vessel, let not thine fire run dry. For a tired mind speaketh what wisdom may deny. Burnout is pretty common if you're working multiple jobs. It's stressful and it's really hard to turn off after work. It's extremely easy just to work yourself to the bone every single day. I mean, the money is fantastic. It would feel wrong not to take advantage of every opportunity. I mean, I did this my first year and completely burnt out. I couldn't even peel myself off of the bed to go to my one meeting that I had that day. To avoid burnout, I found that there were 3 things that you have to do every single day. First one, it's a non-negotiable, and it is moving. That's going to the gym, playing a sport, or just going outside for a walk. I find that my physical health is correlated pretty perfectly to my mental health, thus the more I'm moving, the better. The second thing, being absolutely critical, is a hobby. Something that you can do outside of work that lets you turn off and not think about it. For me, I tried many things in the beginning, the first one being learning languages, which started off as Chinese and then eventually to Spanish, but at a certain point it just started to feel like more work. And then I found ping pong, which for me allowed me to hit my movement goal while also fulfilling a certain competitive side of me. And then the third one, this is just what worked for me, was never working past 5 p.m. The point being that it gave me a deadline that I needed to have all the work finished by. And as we know with Parkinson's law, our work expands to the time that we give it. And if we start to give ourselves unreasonable deadlines, we can complete much more than we think possible. I find that there's many times where I will have a full day to do something and I'm less productive than the days that I only had 2 to 3 hours to do a handful of things. And this also gave me ample time to wind down after work, decompress, and most importantly, have nearly perfect sleep once I started to implement this. And this is important because a tired mind will make more errors. You will slip up, which leads us to the 8th commandment, which is, thou shalt ne'er access personal sites on thy device, nor blend diverse domains with reckless vice. Keep thy digital realms asunder. Just basically saying one laptop for each job, do not commingle them. It's very tempting to just put everything on your main computer, but that is when mistakes happen. You sign into the wrong email, you send a message through the wrong Slack channel, and then suddenly your whole house of cards will fall on top of you. And getting caught by your employer is pretty bad, but getting caught by the government is even worse. which is Commandment 9. Pay thy tithe unto the modern temple, lest thou be cast into the audit wilderness with naught but receipts and regret. Basically, pay your taxes. And taxes are a little more complicated when it comes to overemployment. I'll probably make a whole separate video about it, but on basis, pay your taxes. You can recover pretty easily from getting fired. There are many more jobs out there, but it's much harder to recover if you're in jail. I mean, that's not likely, but if you're being audited by the IRS, it's not great. And most importantly, the 10th commandment, entwine not thyself to foes in disguise, to serve rival lords is to hasten thy demise. Basically, don't work for your competitors. It can be kind of tempting because the job is extremely similar, but this is probably the easiest way to get caught. I have heard so many stories of clients running into an employee and thinking they're from a different company because they're working for 2 different suppliers that they're using. Now, avoiding competitors is pretty easy, but I took it a step further and avoided the entire industries. And this was just to keep myself free of any conflicts of interest. Speaking of which, if you're curious about the legality of overemployment, check out this video where I do a deep dive into everything you need to know. And on that note, there's your 10 commandments. Thanks for watching.